And I'm going to close the door here so I got a little. Okay, so this is Individual Psychology 101, and usually people will refer to individual psychology, Adlerian psychology, but it's Adler actually did not really feel a need to make it his psychology. He had a name for it that was individual psychology, and that's what I refer to it. Even the Adlerian Conference is a North American affiliate for Adlerian psychology. He would have referred to it as individual psychology. And my organization is MASL, so I'll kind of talk to you about my organization as well. So we'll go by the nomiker MASL. We're the Milwaukee affiliate for social living. And we have a three-tiered mission. One is we promote personal growth. Two is we promote professional development. And three, we promote community enrichment. And we do have a website that's just now underway. There's a little bit that I'm working on yet, but you guys will be some of the first to see it if you go to maslcommunity.org. We do have memberships for students and for clinicians in general, so if it seems like something you want to get involved with, please hit us up. And that email is also, I also have an email, maslcommunity@gmail.com. So I gave my email earlier, our official MASL email. You can get me that way too, maslcommunity@gmail.com. And we are an affiliate of the North American Society for Adlerian Psychology, which has its conference we were just chatting about this coming month, later on this month, May 27th through 30th. I will be presenting, I think, 3, maybe 4 times, and we do need volunteers. So I was just chatting with Carrie about that. Mike, I've got a hookup for you if you want to volunteer, you can get them for free. As you know, the Pfister is a historic landmark here. We are going to be doing social distancing and masking, and we're also going to have, it's going to be a hybrid format. So you don't have to come in person. It's a reduced fee. People can also go online. If you're vaccinated and adventurous, I would say, please come in person. For me, it's nice to be out again and to connect in person. Really cool resource that I want people to know about too is called adlerpedia.org. If you go to adlerpedia.org, it's basically a holding house of all things Adlerian. There are definitions and concepts that you can search, but there's also tons of live videos and demonstrations of Adlerian psychology. So it's definitely something to check out. It's a work of the Adler University and Jay Kolker there. So this is the work of Alfred Adler, and that was Adler there, a very kind of dramatic pose for him, 1870 through 1923. Our conference is focused this year on social justice and movement, and Adler was really big on movement. He saw movement as being necessary for growth and development and for mental wellness. And we get people moving in Adlerian psychology, figuratively and literally. Over COVID, I've done all sorts of masked walking sessions with clients, and physically getting out and out of that stuck space allows people to be able to start becoming unstuck in other areas of their life also. Adler has all these really great quotes. He wasn't a fabulous writer, but the books that he has, I'll be kind of sharing some of them today, are all loaded with great stuff. He was a really great speaker, and this is one of my favorite quotes of his. In the entire history of mankind, you will find no isolated persons. The development of mankind was possible only because mankind was a community. So as community-based clinicians, Alfred Adler is recognized as the first community psychologist. We're going to look at his early theory, and then we're going to get into kind of application of new stuff. I apologize, I didn't have an outline here. I usually like to give that. And we're going to get into looking at how the current model of treatment in the DSM, we're going to look at how that applies to Adlerian psychology, and then we're going to end with techniques and some practices. I won't be able to demonstrate any, but I'll describe them today to kind of get people aware of how this is applied. But his early theory was looking largely at biological aspects of human behavior, and he looked at organ inferiority. Adler was fascinated by the fact that people like Beethoven, who had hearing problems, had this insatiable urge and tendency to go into the auditory world and could create music even when not able to hear. And this related back to what we talked about later on is compensation and overcompensation, is that when we experience a physical setback, we'll find ways psychologically to overcome it. And sometimes we end up compensating in the very area where the deficit is. So people who have hearing problems may actually become really focused and interested in music and sound production and so forth. Beethoven is a living example of that. Adler's theory, like many of his contemporaries, kind of changed. He was in tension all the time with Freud, who was at one time a real close ally, and then they became kind of separated over time. And one of the things that Freud was really big on was looking at drives, and he saw these drives inside of us as kind of animalistic urges. Well, Adler took that drives theory, but he kind of approached it in a different way. And he looked at drives as things, as humans being attracted to things outside in the environment. So he looked at ways that we can, our ecology would work to kind of direct our attentions and our energies. And he looked at different sensory drives that we have, and that at times they would converge. And he started looking at drives then as something that kind of converged with one another and satisfied themselves out in the environment. Later on, he used the term aggressive drive, which is something that later in Freud's thinking, he also used. By then, actually, Adler abandoned it. But he looked at little things that we can see in our actions sometimes that are reminiscent of aggression. Babies crying and biting, kids wrestling or fidgeting at times can be a sign of some hostility or aggression. At least that's how Adler was seeing it earlier. And then he also looked at how aggression is displayed in sports, thirst for dominance, race struggles, and nationalism, that our aggression gets displaced in those arenas. He had an entirely socially oriented psychology, as you'll see through our work here. And one of the things that he felt that humans need was a need for affection. He thought that the confluence of our drives were actually seeking for touch, being cared for, being listened to, and that it pervades our conscious and unconscious behavior. We're seeking out always social embeddedness and contact. We have a strong need for affection, and that stays with us through life. And that affection and need for affection is mitigated by culture and social demands. We have strong social feelings as humans because others really are so necessary to our own growth and development. So Adler was also the inventor of the inferiority feelings. If people know about like the Napoleon complex and so forth, inferiority feelings actually, I've been presenting here recently in some lectures. Inferiority feelings were actually paramount in the Brown versus Board of Education determination that overturned separate but equal in the classrooms. And is done through the work of husband and wife, Mamie, and I'm forgetting husband's name. the Clarks. It'll give me later on, but their work was actually derived from Adler's inferiority feelings. And basically what he was looking at is that as humans and as children, we experience a sense of smallness earlier on in life, and we can carry that throughout life. Now, this feeling of inferiority can have healthy manifestations or unhealthy. And a healthy manifestation is when we try to better ourselves and overcome obstacles. And an unhealthy manifestation is we try to lord over others and make others feel smaller in comparison to us. Adler's wife was a staunch feminist and very outspoken in women's rights, and definitely shaped his thinking. He was enamored with her view on femininity and masculinity. Oh, and Micah, we lost her and she's coming back in. Oh. I'm not quite sure why let me try to escape it. There we go. Emitter, there we go. And we're gonna share again. Micah, I hope you're back.
Yes.
Great. Share, great. Super, so what his wife brought to his perspective is that it was preferred and desirable to be manly, and that for us in society, even women would have this sense of needing to man up at times, which really came to the sense that men were valued higher than women in our social ecology, and that Adler looked at things as an egalitarian. He saw perhaps men and women may have different roles in families or society, but these needed to be equal. And he had this term, sexual hermaphroditism, which is kind of a funny thing, term now, hearing it. But the basic idea is that we aren't inside of ourselves genetically male or female, that these are kind of social constructs, in that we have aspects of both that we kind of carry with us. We have guiding lines in terms of how we see mother and father and male and female, and we all relate to those. So in a sense, that's a part of all of us, and a social construct. He also had this really cool term, which a friend of mine said really needs to be the name of an indie rock band, masculine protest. I think that is kind of a more accurate, I think, term than sexual hermaphroditism. Masculine protest is, again, how we attempt to man up or cover up some of our vulnerabilities in masculine displays. I often point out to people that in our society, it's appropriate for and okay for women to wear sweatpants or jeans to feel more comfortable, but we kind of would make fun of it or light of it if a man were to wear a sundress for the same reason. And in actuality, if we're really just looking at comfort, a sundress was delightful to wear on a day when it's really hot. So why do we seem to see that as a diminishing thing for men? But it's okay for women to dress in traditional male clothing, which underlies, again, there's a preference for male gender. Adler was talking about this back in 1910 already. Adler really eventually moved past these other concepts, though, and although they're still in his work, what really became really important to him is this idea of striving, and the confluence of drives actually led to this eventually. And the notion that we have this universality of striving. All of us as humans strive, and that striving is a part of our adaptation. It's how we overcome things. And the picture's a little grainy, but if you look at the picture on the right, you may notice, I guess it's on the right. I guess you'll notice that the thing that runner does not have is legs. And humans have this capacity to overcome even physical things that would be, make it impossible seem impossible to ever run again. We have the capacity to keep going, and that we've got this drive inside of us that we want to encourage in psychology and in mental health. We want to direct people to adapt and to be active in striving. And when there's a will, there's a way. Adler saw really two generic ways of striving could happen in the individual that were, either healthy or unhealthy. He saw this idea of striving for perfection, and not in the sense of being perfectionistic, but trying always to be better, trying always to better ourselves, to be the perfect person onto others, to be the perfect person onto society, or the striving for personal power and superiority. And some of us just want to be better than everyone else. And it doesn't really matter if we have faults, as long as our faults are on top of the other people's faults. We want to end up on top. And through it all, he came up with this beautiful concept we'll be talking about throughout the day: social interest. And social interest is a term we're going to have to unpack in several slides. But at one point, he said the best way of describing it is to see with the eyes of another, to hear with the ears of another, to feel with the heart of another. For the time being, this seems to me an admissible definition for what we call social interest. And he actually took that quote from a writer. I can't quite remember who said that originally, but Adler was an avid reader and interested in the humanities. Okay, so the term in German is Gemeinschaftsgefühl. So this is my attempt at learning humor. Social interest is really a term that we can't completely say. And the term, it means something like concern about others, interest in the interests of others, or community feeling. And these two words are both really important aspects of Gemeinschaftsgefühl. Gemeinschaftsgefühl at times means that I feel at one with my community and others, in the circle of humanity, connected. But it also means I have values and perceptions that I move on, that I act on individually, that I'm guided by this connected feeling to others, even when others aren't around. And I'm working constantly in service of the needs of others. Social interest has components that have to do with cooperation and the opportunity for us to each have a different role in the big scheme of things. Social interest has some biological implications, and that we, as humans, we need to care for our children, and it's necessary for society to be watching out for the most vulnerable. And biologically, then social interest aligns with evolution. And even a metaphysical aspect where beyond life and beyond time, social interest is perhaps embedded in all major religions and faith beliefs that place the needs of others and service of others as a life priority. Social interest can be described as an evaluative attitude. When we say it is a feeling, we are certainly justified in doing so, but is more than a feeling. It is an evaluative attitude towards life. It's the attitude that we take in assessing all things that are done, and whether or not these are things that we want to support or things that we need to stand up against. All right, I'm shifting gears a bit, and there's this really cool term also that I feel is important for us, basic level of understanding individual psychology, phenomenology. And this has to do with the fact that a phenomena seems to, whatever we experience seems to reaffirm itself in some way. And as humans, we enter the world not as it is, but as we see it, as we perceive it. So we have our sensory apparatus, our eyes are conducted in a certain way, our noses are created in a certain way, our tongues and our taste and our ears and our tactile, all taking in information. And we create really a version of the world that we subjectively experience. And that version of the world has been edited and has been designed through our early life experience. And then how we perceive what's happening is read through that filter. And therapy, at times, we may work with somebody who is difficult seeing or hearing or whatever. And in our society now, we can give vision to people who can't see. We can give hearing to people who couldn't hear. So we have technology now, we have therapies now that actually can correct sensory apparatus, which was something that was not occurring in Adler's time. But we as clinicians, we also have the ability to change through therapy, through psychotherapy, how people perceive their experiences. And through their choices and their behavior, then they can reconfigure how they experience others also. That they begin to exchange and interact with the world in a way that's better. Adlerian psychology really is based on, to some extent, what Adler referred to as the creative self. Now, I'm going to add to this to clarify is that Adler was what we'd call a soft determinist. He didn't think that the will existed like we can just will ourselves into some sort of better space. Our lives are shaped by our biological apparatus and our genes and by the things that we experience. So we have some limits. But within those limits, humans are always finding creative solutions to new problems. And that we're at our heart a very creative species. And I think of Wilson on Castaway with Tom Hanks, when having no human contact at all, no social interaction whatsoever, Tom Hanks created a social entity in Wilson the ball. His creative self actually made for him a companion. And as humans, we have this constant need for connection with others. And we have this creative self. And sometimes when we don't have a world worth living in, we create it within our own subjective experience. Adler was interested in the degree of activity. So I have days where I'm a sloth off to the left there, and then at times that I'm on the trapeze. We really have to look at our human experiences, one where it demands participation and that where we need to be active. And again, I said earlier, the idea of movement, I'll sometimes go walking with a client and just say, we're not even going to talk about what's bothering. We're going to go out for a walk and get physically moving because activity begets activity. I have clients that are saying like, I'm taking naps all day, I can't get out of bed. And I said, it tires me down to have that many naps. You'd think it's rejuvenating, but in actuality, your body creates habits and routines, and then it learns to metabolize energy and store energy in a certain way based off of that principle. So we have to get clients moving to actually get them to be able to move past the emotional and the social circumstances they're in. Adler had a form of typology, and what this means is he was able to look at people in categories. So if you think of social interest in one domain, maybe going up and down, and degree of activity in another degree, he had basically 4 quadrants where we may find ourselves at any given time. And because we're creatures of habit, we may end up inhabiting one of these quadrants more than others. So in therapy, we're always kind of watching for which quadrant the person may have gotten stuck in. And the first one is the getting type. The getting type is, as you see, this girl raising her hand, passively wanting to give the answers, or the family taking in entertainment and wanting to be entertained. They have an interest in others. They have an interest maybe even in pleasing others, but they have kind of a passive way of engaging in meeting those needs, those social needs. They want it to come to them. Then we have the avoiding type, and the avoiding type has low social interest. They're not necessarily interested in being around people. They don't want to be social, and they have a low activity level. Leave me alone. I'm just going to find my own corner of the world, and I want to be there. Next, we have the controlling type, and the controlling type have a high degree of activity. They really don't care about other people. They may see people as a means to the end. They're not really concerned or interested in other people, but they see that others can get them what they want. And then what we're striving for is the socially useful type. And I have a scientist here. I really think we often think of socially useful type and social types as like, teachers and social workers. But for me, it's any skill set that you have, if you do it with social concern and the rights and the betterment of the world, kind of as a part of it, that you're in a contributory headspace, you're a socially useful type, an accountant, an honest politician, an honest scientist, but also somebody who's really good at baking groceries and wants to make sure not to crush other people's eggs. Somebody who wants to make sure that your shoes fit just right. They're not just going to buy something you don't need, These are people, this is what really directs healthy social living. Adlerian psychology has two basic senses of how we take in the world. We can look at common sense on one side, which is like how the world really is. And this requires us to be objective and put judgment aside and to seek out and be curious and listen to other experts and to value other people's opinions. And then we have private logic, which was just like me thinking whatever I think is true, and I don't want to be disrupted in it. And when people are in a funk, oftentimes they're stuck in the world of private logic. They're not able to see things in an objective way. They're not able to see the forest through the trees anymore. They see it basically from the standpoint of it's not working for me, so I'm discouraged and I'm not motivated. There's this theme throughout Adlerian psychology of being goal-directed, and fictional finalism is what we're really shooting for in the end. And all of us as humans at some point in time have to really ask ourselves, what are we really here for? What are we really shooting towards? What's the object of our desire, really? And that in the end, we get what we really want. It's just that maybe we didn't really want what we wanted. It's the false goals that we sometimes, for us, maybe motives for the goals that we have that can get us into trouble. In individual psychology, there's also basically 3, and some will say 5, but we're just going to talk about 3 today, life tasks. These are things that life demands of us one way or the other, and we have to kind of come to terms with. First one is love and intimacy, finding kind of partnering up. Adlerian psychology in its history was like other psychologies at the time, rather heterosexist. Adlerian psychology now looks at partnership not necessarily as being hetero or needing to be heteronormative, and we look at any form of relationship that we find ourselves partnered in as being a goal and a task in life that is worth the effort. We also have work, whatever it is that you contribute, and keep in mind, even people who are unable to work, even people on disability, still have to do work. They have to do something to contribute, and they may knit things for people, or they may watch people's children, or they may do things that cook for others, that doing things that give their life meaning and purpose. And usually, again, there's a sense of giving and contributing to society. And there's a whole separate thing then that Adler talks about. We don't think about in our society too much, but I think we don't realize, but community. And this is social life. This is being embedded in our community, whatever it is that we want to connect with in our larger community. All right, so with that, you can kind of look at, Adler had this generally, would describe it as an evolutionary priority. And on one hand, we can put our striving towards, the idea of striving towards perfection will direct us through healthy relationships, through work, and through community. And this is what Adler referred to in the earlier strive in socially useful behavior. But then you have people that are just shooting for, personal superiority, or trying to feel better than others, or even feeling better than the moment. And it can send us into circumventional paths. And Adler identified drugs, crime, and delinquency, and self-harm as all examples of behavior that had maladaptive, from a social evolutionary standpoint, maladaptive aspects. And he equated those always as striving for personal power. First 5 years are very impactful, so we really have to think about when we're raising children. Oeli was talking about 2 babies, and how do we, what are the values that we're going to place around our children, and what are we going to give them and teach them and guide them? How are we going to instruct them in terms of what's important? And you've got these, I guess, 5 different examples here of early in life, what life might be like. You know, you have the child made to be a bodybuilder at the age of whatever, 4 or 5 there, and probably not looking very natural, and having all sorts of perspectives about what I need to do that are kind of ingrained in him at that early age. You have a child here who's laying in a bed with guns and money out in front of him, and also stuffed animals. So there's certainly a sense that somebody's trying to care for him, but yet who knows what's going around that child and what those first few years are like. We have two parents here with a child in the middle of them being cared for and loved. We've got a young girl here who's made to look like a woman and already wearing makeup and maybe expected to look and experience life in a way that's not developmentally where she's at, like the young man. And then we have a mother here spending some special time with her daughter and giving some attention. So just imagining, you know, the first 5 years of life, what are the messages that we got from the world, and what is it that we were designed to be at that young age? There's this really cool term called family constellation. And family constellation is like the stars in the sky. A constellation directs us through life. We know what's north, we know what's south by the constellation in the sky. And Adler saw us relative to our family members in childbirth, our earliest childhoods, earliest families. And that could be a biological family or an adopted family, or it could be kind of a blending of the both. But we saw ourselves relative to those other individuals. And throughout life, we kind of know who we are and how we are in relation to those individuals. And if something happens to them or we lose a family member, they're not lost inside of us, and our birth order or our orientation or role in the family starts shaping how we engage in contact with others later on. So in some ways, it was like a constellation where we could look up and it would guide us through life, what direction to go. But it's also a constellation in the sense that you were one of the stars in there, and you only know yourself relative to the others. And if you think about it, nobody's in the same constellation. You're born into a different constellation than any of your siblings were, because by the time your star was there, their star at one point their constellation didn't involve you, and it had to evolve for you to be in it. Your spot in that constellation changed the whole constellation. And that's a real pinnacle view on Adlerian psychology, where people will say, well, genetically you're the same person, or similar people, because you had the same parents. And in terms of environment, you're in the same home. So why are the two of you, why is one of you an artist and why is one of you a scientist? Well, it's because within the constellation, we define ourselves in relation to one another. So if you're the funny one, then I have to be the serious one. So the family environment actually puts us sometimes in contention with one another as we try to find harmony. Adler had this term called lifestyle, not to be confused with personality. Lifestyle is dynamic and is changing. Personality looks more at static traits in general. And lifestyle is how we ordain ourselves to be in the world. And lifestyle we think of it as a little bit more malleable, although it's hard to change, than personality. Lifestyle really comes down to the goals that we end up with in life and things we're shooting for. And soft determinism, from an Adlerian standpoint, has to do with the goals that you're shooting for. So if you're trying to be superior over others always, you're going to find yourself in constant conflict with others. But if you can realign your values or the way you're looking at things, if you can, through psychotherapy or self-work or whatever, strive for something healthier. I want to just be the best version of me that I can within the parameters of your biology and your temperament and your traits. You can do something different with the traits that you're given when you realign your values and your focus in life. Lifestyle is always changing. It's our way of creating ourself in a way. It's also somewhat replicated through behavior. And it's something that our lifestyle is actually projected out in everything we see in nature and in social interactions that we have with others. Our lifestyle is that filter, is that way of experiencing things. Like I say to my clients, everywhere you go, there you are. Early recollections are the psychological and emotional lines that we have in our head back to our childhood. And we carry certain little recollections with us because they tell us about how we are and who we are in the world around us. There's some really good books from Adlerian psychology and early recollections. If those of you maybe at the coming to the conference, you'll even be able to sit in on a couple of the presentations where we'll do live early recollection collection with a volunteer there. And it's fascinating how much information we can get from how people share their earliest experiences. And in fact, one of the things that Adlerian psychologists like to do is collect recollections from famous notable people. And you'll often notice that in the tiniest interactions that people had early in childhood or how they share that now, it reveals something about themselves. Now, the other thing to know about memory in general and early recollections in particular is that it's a creation that's happening currently. These are not really pictures from before. We remember and recall them by habit, and we maintain those throughout life, but our recollections can change and the tone of them can change based on what's happening in our life right now. And memories always serve a purpose during a time of uncertainty to help us remember what the world is like and how to get through it. So our memories can change from time to time based on where we're at with our own current life and what's going on in our circumstances. You never remember happy moments at a time when you're grieving, or it's hard to remember them. And it's also really hard to remember the bad times when things are going well because of the way our memories are loaded and how they serve us. So Adler was ahead of the time in being able to kind of understand that functional aspect of memory. All right, and then I'm going to leave you to share a little bit of this. The idea is field of inquiry, and Adlerian psychology gets its views somewhere, like where are we getting these perspectives from? Where are we getting our thinking from? And this is introduced by a man named Bob Powers, who is recently just passed away in the last few years, but had a big contributor in individual psychology. And he saw a field of inquiry in individual psychology as being biological. So we are interested in biology and biological processes and humans as biological organisms. But we're also cultural too. We're cultural entities. We find, and this is one of the reasons that Adler and Freud separated, is that Freud was not as tolerant of the idea of culture really being formative in changing how we are. He wanted to look at people in a more generic way. And he had a particularly Western way of looking at using measuring and looking at people. And then transactional, and transactions are the interactions that we have with others. You know, if I give you something, you feel compelled to give something back to me. So he also looked at that as being an aspect. And if you kind of look at those three things, working together, individual psychology takes aspects of all that and synthesizes them. All right, now, normally this would be a good time for questions. I did promise I'm going to try to stay focused and going through, but I know I threw a lot at you. Is there anything that people want to unmute or ask about right now before we go into this next section, which is going to be looking more at treatment and psychopathology? No? All right, great. Since we're all here together, you're never interrupting. You're a part of the experience. So if people think of something that you just have to say or ask, feel free to unmic and share. Okay, so psychopathology and treatment is we are as clinicians, we are interested in treatment. We are interested in psychopathology, and we'll kind of know what why people are suffering. Why are they suffering? That being said, Adlerians are not, except for the fact that we need to um, for insurance purposes. I rarely feel compelled to find out what a person's diagnosis is. I'm usually trying to figure out what's bothering them and how to help them, which is different. And a diagnosis is kind of an artifact of our medical system right now, where we're looking at pathology as being a broken thing within us. And for me, and for most of my Adlerian colleagues, we look at things a little bit more dynamically, and we look at circumstances and biology all contributing to where people are at a given time, and we have to look at it constantly. And whether a person meets a diagnostic criteria or not rarely has much to do with why they're here to see us. Adler had a really good book that kind of set the tone for his thinking early, 1916, The Neurotic Constitution. It is a good read. It's certainly, it's encrypted in the time that it is written, but I would almost say delightfully so. There's part of it that I really kind of enjoy. I like reading old stuff though, and understanding it kind of from a modern day. But he was really trying to get away from Freud's more mechanistic way of looking at things, and he started turning to things like philosophy to understand how humans operate, and that kind of changed the tone and the tenor of how he approached psychology, and began looking at people more individualistically, but also in social context. And when he used the word individual, he was really looking at something more like the word indivisible or unitary or holistic. Psychopathology and Psychotherapy is a book that came out here recently, I guess in the last 5 years or so. Actually, the most recent edition of it, this is probably the first version, was I think maybe from the 80s. But this is now applied to looking at the DSM-5, and it's by notable Adlerians, Len Sperry, John Carlson, who actually was living in Lake Geneva until he died a little while ago, and then John's son, or Len's son, Sperry, who was actually, I believe, named after John. And then Jill Duba Sarbauer, I have not had the pleasure of meeting her. General worldview of psychopathology in Adlerian psychology. So basically, the way Adler saw it and Adlerian see it is that we have, at some point, without intending, we have a mistaken view of ourselves, others, in the world, or mistaken lifestyle, or mistaken goals. And related to this, a basic sense of inadequate social interest. And we're going to always be thinking about this for the task at hand. Now, we all have different strengths and assets, and there might be areas where we have tremendous amount of social interest, and our lifestyle may be really working well for us. But we run into something, a stressor, and we're unable to cope with it, and we weren't designed to deal with it. So then we end up, from that scenario, having increased feelings of inferiority, and then we strive to feel better about ourselves or our situation in ways that's not consistent with social interest. And safeguarding behaviors, which Adler referred to as defense mechanisms, as safeguarding behaviors. So things that we do to make ourselves feel better about ourselves, but they're not necessarily really better for us. Abnormal, then coming out of that is what we call as abnormal or problematic behavior. Adler had the term inferiority complex, which is basically when somebody gets stuck into thinking that they can't get better, and views themselves as perpetually inferior to all circumstances. We end up with a lot of safeguarding or defensive behaviors and problems in living. So whatever it is in the DSM, you can kind of break it down to these things are going on at some basic level. Adler had a system that was very parallel to the DSM-5. DSM-5 looks at clinical conditions, personality disorders, medical conditions, psychosocial stressors, and global assessment of functioning as ways of kind of checking in on people. Adler, instead of calling it a clinical condition, he talked about it as an arrangement. And he really saw it as something that was manifest and created in the individual with adaptive purpose, but it was not adaptive in the end, and they got stuck on it. So he looked at it as almost as, and because he was socially oriented, he saw it always as there was a social note for this. You know, the person who was depressed or anxious could only be understood, their anxiety could always be understood in social context. Rather than personality disorder, though, we looked at lifestyle, how our goals and so forth can get us sometimes into trouble. He looked at physical, medical conditions in terms of organ inferiority and things that our bodies may not be doing well, or metabolism problems, or physical illness that's got us now feeling not like ourselves. And then organ jargon is what he called organ jargon is what we'd call nowadays body talking. Somebody says they got a stomach ache or a headache and they can't function in a certain way, but there's not a real medical, it's not like they have a fever, it's not like they have the flu or something like that. They're having muscular tension, and it's created by the circumstance that they're in. And their body's basically saying something. Like when your child says, "Mommy, I can't go to school because my tummy hurts," what it's basically saying is, I'm afraid and feel incapable to meet the demands of school. It's intimidating and challenging. There's threats there that you don't understand, and I don't want to have to confront them on my own. But the stomach creates a language that a mom understands and the kid understands, and that is, I can't handle it today, Mom. Then we have the life tasks that we're looking at. I'm always, if somebody's coming to therapy, I'm thinking, okay, well, what has got you here? It's a relationship thing. It's a work kind of thing, or it has to do with your community life, your social life. And I usually find with most intakes, all three have some sort of work that they're trying to work towards.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think you skipped one. The shock.
Oh, shock. Yeah, great. Oh, yes. Thank you, OLA. You were on it. That's the most important one. All right. So the shock, or the exogenous factor. It's fun to say. Exogenous, the thing that's outside of us, that's the cause, factor. And what it basically means is there's certain things in life that I'm not equipped to deal with. Now, I have a lot of social interests. I care about others. I'm aware of what I need to do to be a good person or whatever. But there's certain circumstances that maybe my upbringing or my experiences up until now weren't ready for. And that's when the shock comes in. And it's interesting, it doesn't always have to be a bad thing. Now, Adlerian psychology is highly trauma informed in the sense that we were looking at this exogenous factor. It's like, I'm going out into the world and I get mugged or attacked and assaulted, and now I feel like the world is violent. I was going through the world in a naive kind of way that things are safe and okay, and now I feel that I have to be on guard all the time. So physiologically, I'm on defense, I'm hypervigilant, and I'm having nightmares and experiences that I can't undo. So I'm living in this kind of aftermath of the shock. But it also can be somebody wins the lottery and they weren't prepared to have like copious amounts of money. They've always had to work for every dollar they have. So now they have all this money and they have friends that they don't really trust. After a while, they start living in a way that's not sustainable. So it could be something good that happens, but the shock, the exogenous factors, the thing outside of me that sent me into a position where now I feel like I'm out of balance. Good catch. Okay. And then in a sense, there's only two diagnoses though in the Adlerian psychology. There's the yes, but, and the no. And life demands things from us. And we can say, yes, but, I know I should do it, but, or no. And life, yes, but, is tasks that maybe we know we need to do, but we're going to avoid or stall them. It's like the person on the end of the pier going back and forth before they're jumping in to learn how to swim. And I don't know if I can handle it. Anxiety does that. Depression does that. Depressive disorders, anxiety, somatic, I got a headache, I got a stomach ache. These are all substance dependence, maybe to some extent. I know I have to do it, but I just can't do it now. So it's kind of, they have a way of keeping us from really submitting ourselves to the thing. And then there's the no, and no happens in times where our bodies and our functioning just basically say, I am not going to play the game of society. We may revert to life expectations. We may have a godlike sense of superiority. I'm better than all of this. People who have a psychotic break will often talk about themselves as if they're operating in God's interest or whatever. But it's really a way of, like I said earlier, like Wilson and Tom Hanks, I'm just going to create my own reality here, and I'm not going to participate in the world around me. Psychotic delusions, pronounced mania, and dissociation. And although we really look at psychotic processes, rightfully so, as being largely brain embedded, because we know there's a high genetic loading for psychotic processes, there's also a reality that not everybody who has genetic loading for it actually manifests psychotic processes. It's circumstances that they run into that maybe not ready to manage that can contribute to things like poverty, things like abuse, things like being a refugee, an immigrant. This is something that's interesting, is that research has now found that if you take a war refugee and you displace them and you put them into an unlike community, an unlike environment from Iraq to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The language is different, culture is different, norms are different. The more different that society is, the more likely the person will develop and manifest psychotic processes and psychotic symptoms. So it's being kind of without a social rudder. There's no way to be connected or embedded in the world, and we're facing some hardships. So there's a sense that sometimes the no is because I can't handle it and I won't do it. But sometimes the no is socially contrived. The world won't give me a chance. The world won't allow me to be a part of it. And that's where those processes, the more problematic processes, not just depression, but depression with psychotic features or whatever, it's when you start seeing those. Psychosis, we look at in the same way. So this kind of is we're just talking about again. We have the vulnerability plus life conditions, decision-making, self-training, and discouragement leads to the psychotic processes. Now that was way back in 1968, they're saying that. They've updated the model somewhat in 96 with stress plus brain-mind vulnerability, which was de-emphasized at one time and is now more rightfully emphasized. Coping and self-training and decision-making. It's interesting is that one of the most important ingredients in helping people with psychotic disorders out of their psychotic disorders is life training, skill development. Yeah, the medication is important, but there also has to be a capacity for me to be able to communicate with others again, figure out how I can take care of myself in a way that I can be independent and autonomous, budgeting, simple things of that nature for some people. Others need to be taught and understood. So there's more to treatment with psychotic processes than just medication. Depression, we kind of have people that are sometimes organized around guilt, and then sometimes people that are organized around past external occurrence or past misfortune, bad thing that happened that I'm never going to unlive. And that Adler said the categorical imperative of melancholia, which is what we used to call depression, is act, think, feel in such a way that as if the horrible fate that you have conjured up has already befallen you and was inevitable. Now, more recently, research in science on depression has more or less affirmed this. Depressive clients will score really low on hopelessness, and also they'll have the 3 Ps. They'll see their circumstances as permanent, pervasive, and personal. And with those 3 Ps, it's like there's no sense. It's all me. It's all the time, and whatever it is in all circumstances, it's going to be that way. So those are circumstances where, as if the thing that's most possible thing has happened already. So depressed people, it's not like it's that bad thing's going to happen. It's like it's already happened and I can't get out of it. And that's what makes depression so hard to treat. We have anxiety. Adlerian interpretations of anxiety of panic disorder, agoraphobia, and obsessive compulsive disorder. And the goal there is to separate ourselves, create distance between us and life tasks. So I'm just kind of trying to avoid things that I'm not quite ready for. Agoraphobia, anxiety, neurosis, and all forms of phobia may originate at this point, individuals' unwillingness to admit defeat. We don't want to fail at something. But whichever may be, it fulfills its purpose by blocking to further activity. So I can't fail if I'm not going to ever get out there and try. So these things actually hold us hostage instead of bringing us into the world and facing the things that we need to overcome. Thus, what is desired or obtained, namely the ordeal, is evaded without disclosing, even to its owner, the hated feeling of inferiority. So we hide from ourselves the fact that we're afraid and we're not wanting to fail. And we distract ourselves then in ways physiologically and psychologically that keep us in a way safe from failure. Then with anxiety of generalized anxiety disorder, post-traumatic stress, and social phobia, it's a little bit different. And in these scenarios, what it is it seems to be a copious appraisal of future catastrophic failure. So it's basically like there's something that is happening that's so bad, and the future is so dire that I don't even want to get, I have no coping devices that allow me to face the future again. Substance abuse, Adler looked at, and then later on, Adlerians looked at as also somewhat of an escape mechanism. Substance abuse is not a unitary disease affecting all individuals in the same way. And although sometimes it's approached that way, I think it can be very problematic when you look at things in that rigid format. With substance abuse, one of the things that happens is the voice of the community has typically been silenced. It's we stop listening to what other people are wanting from us or expecting or what they're feeling, and we're really focused on our own subjective experience. Belonging is often found among other users, so we're all going to have fun together, so we don't have to worry about what those other people are saying. Holism, no one cause. It's multidimensional, so it's like we don't really look at it as being just a genetic predisposition, although that's part of it. And then teleology of purpose, as has to do with our purpose. Goals may be around making life easier, pampering ourselves, insulating ourselves from failed tasks or threats associated with life tasks. Oh, I've been reading those ahead of time. All right, let me follow my. So the first now, somatoform disorders is when our body's communicating to us what we're needing. We have psychological factors affecting physical condition, and that would be when we have like an actual organic pathology, and that might be, you know, you're actually sick and your body's needing to heal or recover, and at times our psychological experience can literally cause us to become physically sick. You've probably been familiar with resilience, work on resilience. Did you know the first studies on resilience was done in the 1970s? Was actually done using the flu, exposing people to the flu virus. And what's interesting is that there were some people who are exposed to the flu virus and some people that weren't. All people are exposed to the flu virus. Some people got sick and some people didn't. And what they found was personality correlates that differed the two. So the early personality correlates we look at that coincide with resilience, and we think of that usually psychologically, actually has to do with medical illness. So there's this thing where stress, when we're under stress, we can become more susceptible to illness. Physical illness we're talking about, and psychological circumstances contributing to that. But then we have what's called somatization disorder or conversion disorders, and that is organic symptoms without organic pathology. So I've got a headache, or I went blind in one eye, or something of that nature, and it's like there isn't a medical reason for this. There's not a neurological reason for it. something's happening, the individual's experiencing some sort of distress and it's manifesting in this way. And then we have hypochondriasis. There's no organic pathology or organic symptoms. And that is, people believe themselves to be sick, although they really don't have any of the symptoms. The thing that's common in all of these is the person is within a sick or impaired role. So no matter what, it's like they're coming and seeking help, but they may be with an actual medical condition. They may have a physiological experience, but they're not really even, but not a medical reason for it. And they may be just believing themselves and convinced to be sick, although they don't even have physical symptoms. But the thing that's common in all those is the idea of being sick or impaired. Then we also have dissociative disorders, which is the last one we're going to look at. And we have things like dissociative amnesia, dissociative fugue, depersonalization, dissociative identity disorder. And in these situations, we split off from consciousness. And what we've learned more and more is that this is based in trauma. Things that happen, we can psychologically distance ourselves from those experiences in different ways. And that causes problems for many. Okay, I'm realizing we're at a time, we're at 7:12, and I'm realizing that people are watching the time you need to go. We are recording this and can share it, but I'm going to keep going, and I'm glad to have you here, because now we're getting to the point of what does Adlerian psychology do about all this stuff. First thing is Adler was the first big psychologist to have a self-help book, and he wrote this book that I've got probably still here. Yep, I do. What Life Could Mean to You. And it really was looking at psychological application of things like how to live within social interest, how to be active, and how to overcome problems. And he actually has, unlike other psychotherapies, which really look at how do you not be sick, Adler actually looked at how do you be healthy, how do you live in a way that's psychologically healthy. It's a little different. Just not being sick is not enough. We want to be able to be actually healthy. There are two books that are really for interpreting, two really good ones for interpreting lifestyle, and I'd highly recommend picking up either one of these. At different times, I've liked Manual for Lifestyle Assessment better, and then at different times, I've liked The Key to Psychotherapy better. But these are both great books, and they really describe why how to do lifestyle inventory with a client. So you sit down with somebody, you collect early recollections, and you also find out about their early childhood, and you find out what their problems are right now. And by the time it usually takes about, 10 to 12 sessions to get all the information, but you really can have a neat blueprint of where they're at and where they're trying to go with it. And almost always you can identify underlying assumptions or beliefs that get them into trouble. There's also just early recollection interpretation. That's a part normally of lifestyle or lifestyle inventory, but early recollections can be collected by themselves. And I used to do it during assessments. And you get people to kind of share with you in detail, like it's a movie, what happened. Tell me give me 10 memories from before you were 8. I try to get them young. What happened in the memory, and then what was most vivid, and then you ask some follow-up questions, and you can get a really neat blueprint. And you really can only understand the memories when you get a bunch of them. The more that you have, the better. You can start seeing patterns. Adlerians are really big on child guidance. This has been for a long time. Adler actually had, I think, 28 freestanding child guidance clinics in Vienna before he had to leave because of the war. But these were all free, and they were basically open to the public. And a lot of the perspectives that you're going to get at the NASAP conference, for those of you that go, on parenting, they're the same basic things that he was saying in 1912. He's really ahead of his time. I guess 1920s before he was doing parenting stuff. But these are 3 of my favorite books in parenting, and they're still, all of them, very good today. Children, the Challenge is probably, it's the oldest, and you can tell when you read it. It's I think a little, at times it can be kind of heavy-handed, and language can seem, I think, a little harsh sometimes. But the message is there, sentiment is there for sure, and the strategies are all well outlined. And then more recently, we had Positive Discipline, which was first written in the 80s. Jane Nelson is going to be at the conference. So she's 80 years old now, and still goes out, actually has been into China most recently to share these perspectives. And then the most kind of recent voice in parenting in the Larian community is Allison Schaefer. So Rudolph Dreikers wrote Children the Challenge, Jane Nelson is Positive Discipline, and then Allison Schaefer. And Allison Schaefer was for the Huffington Post, she's the parenting expert for a while, and she's gone on to something else, and I can't remember, but it's she's just fun, and I hope Allison's going to be there. But all of them, all three of those books will talk about something that Dreikers brought up, and that's the goals of misbehavior. And when children, even adults, misbehave, there's usually a motive or an intent behind it that's kind of good or intending to be good. First one is attention. Kids will sometimes just want attention and need attention. And I like to think of that as a need that children have and not necessarily like a greedy want. You know, oh, he needs attention, so we're going to do to give him more attention. Power. Children need power and have the ability to make decisions and choices in their life. And when they feel like they've been robbed of it, they'll get greedy for it. Revenge. Children that have hurts, that have experienced upsets, will take it out on their parents. And I'll have parents all the time. They're doing the punishments. They got the star charts out. They're doing whatever they can to try to, get the kids' behavior to be better. But what they seem to be, unable to acknowledge is that this kid's angry with you or hurt about something. And if you can identify the right motive in the moment, it can change instantaneously how the discipline or the parenting transaction goes. I'm thinking you're hurt right now. I know I'm fighting. I want to be angry at you, but I'm wondering maybe there's something else going on. Maybe you're feeling hurt. Maybe something I did hurt you. And then you can have a kid who is really angry one moment, now break down into tears the next, because you're able to identify what the goal really was. And a lot of times we like to think it's attention. Oh, he's just trying to get attention. So that's one of the most common things parents will say. Oh, he's just trying to get attention. But oftentimes, if it's persistent enough, and if your feelings will tell you too. Like if it's attention, you're a little annoyed. But if you're feeling angry, it's often power. And if you're feeling hurt, it's often revenge. And the last one, it's really hard to undo. Display of inadequacy. Sometimes, and I think this is a latter thought of Dreikers. Sometimes kids are just trying to show you, I can't do it. Look how inept I am. And each one of these has different solutions. You can't apply the same solutions to all of them. You have to kind of understand what the goal is. One way that we address family issues is through family meetings. That was a very much an Adlerian thing. We sit down, we talk. My family's just started having them again here recently. And we talk about what we're going to do. And sometimes it's just making plans and stuff. There's always a compliments component. You want to begin with positives. You want to identify what concerns are, and then you get the kids to help out. And it's fascinating is that kids will often give harsher punishments for things than what the parents would. It's just fascinating. And they'll do them then. It's just because it's like a democratic kind of thing. Like, well, I had a say in it. I said I have to take the video game away if I misused it, and I did it. So now that goes up, and it's something that can be really easy when you have the right approach in a meeting. There's also the 4 C's, which are really important to know for Larian parenting. You want to be able to connect with your child. You want to work in a way that makes your child feel capable. You want the child to feel like they count. And this one we forget about a lot, and this is so important. We need children to have courage. We want children to have that sense that I can confront things and I'm going to try. And if you have these four C's, you've got these 4 things, you got the 4 C's. You've got the building blocks of kind of what the kid's going to need to be successful then through life. When we consult, this is something that I wanted to share before. We're just about done. We got a couple techniques we're going to share. But this is real important. This is something I'd be happy to kind of go over in greater depth in the future. And I just learned this recently myself, but my mentor and the people I'll be presenting with in conferences here, Wes Winget, has this way of conceptualizing. And that is when you're working with the case, you want to go around the 6-sided hexagram here. And the first thing is we look at on the bottom Adlerian theory. We're kind of thinking from a theory, what would the theory say about all of this? We want to look at empathy and how empathy is played out by the therapist, and also looking at empathy as being a component for healing going forward. Like we're trying to promote empathy. Then we have encouragement. Encouragement is very big. It's actually bestowing courage upon others is what it means. And it's when you identify things that are going well and you put it into words. And it's not the same as praise. Praise is, oh, you look so nice, or you've done something, or you look so nice, or you got a good grade and I'm happy. Encouragement is, I can see that you really care about your appearance because you put a lot of work into, dolling yourself up. It's encouragement's more focused on valuing why the person's doing it, putting language to it, and affirming their own values. And then you have ethics, which you have to look at all the time. At learning psychology, that's where common sense versus private logic comes in. We really have to look at laws and how our practice, the ACA, American Counseling Association, the American Psychological Association have ethics that help us be better clinicians. We need to apply that every case. Education is the idea that we can teach as therapists. That's part of what we do. And what are the things that maybe this person needs to know, or where might their education be a benefit? If somebody that's got a doctorate in social work, is going to need a different kind of therapist than one who doesn't. And then equality. For all things we do as Atlanteans, you have to make sure that we really are serving in a position of equality. Yeah, I have skills and training that are bestowed upon me that allow me to be a therapist or a psychologist, but that doesn't make me more important or better than you. And I have to really look at how equality plays out in our relationship with the clients, but also how does equality play out in the life of our clients? Are they living in a world of access? Do they have resources? Are they treated in a way with empathy and concern from the world around them? Do they live equality in their day-to-day life? All right, now we're going to go finally into techniques. So we've got, I think, 4 of them that I'm going to share with you today. You've maybe heard of these before. The first one sounds disgusting, but it really isn't. Spitting in the soup. Spitting in the soup is what we do as clinicians when we can accurately identify what the motive is for a person's behavior. When we can accurately identify it. And you do it within the context of a supportive, constructive, therapeutic relationship. We don't minimize or diminish people. It almost seems as if the thing that you may be wanting more than anything in this life is for people to be able to listen to you and to do what you're telling them. And if that's accurate, if that's what the client is really about, the client will recognize that and they'll have a response like, that's it, that's it. And then you say, well, but that's not always going to work. And sometimes that gets you in trouble. And sometimes people get upset about it, But the idea is to get to that point. And then what's interesting is like soup that you spit in. If the behavior is problematic, at some point you want to stop eating it. It's like, you know what? Now that you put it that way, I'm not quite sure if I want to engage in that. I think maybe there's another way I can get that need met. So that's called spitting in the soup. There's also, this is really big. This is great. I do this all the time. The typical day. And when clients talk about everything being bad and awful or chaotic, start at the beginning of the day, get me to the end of the day. What happens in a typical day? And for most of my clients that have chronic mental health concerns, we end up with a daily routine, and we end up with a weekly routine, and then we even do a monthly and a yearly one. And if you can get through that, if people can kind of give you an idea of what is happening in a typical day, and then start planning out some better stuff. But one of the things you'll notice a lot of times typical day activities is if you get them to talk about their typical day, problems will replicate at different times throughout the day. That maybe the problems that are happening with the family in the morning are similar to the types of problems they're having at nighttime. Or I have a client right now, we were just delighted to realize that he gets anxious at night. Yeah, why is it at night? It's kind of like, well, that's weird. It's like this, it's only happening at night. That's kind of cool. And sometimes with aging people, they have what's called sundowning, which is depression or confusion in the evening. So you just say it's just sundowning. Now you're not even depressed anymore. It's sundowning. So it's like finding rhythms can help us understand how to prepare for it. And by the time people, you don't have to tell them to do something different. Once they see what the pattern is, they go, oh, okay, I can do that different. The magic question, which is used big in solution-oriented approach. What would be different tomorrow if by magic the problem went away tonight in your sleep? And what Adler used that for is to separate out medical causality from psychological causality. I asked this question. I've worked for a long time period with refugees, and when we started asking refugees this, it was fascinating because they had depression and anxiety and all sorts of things that are impacting upon their life, or physical. Sometimes there's physical things that were really maybe psychological in nature. And I said, well, if this problem were to go away tomorrow, what could you do? Well, I could stand up and turn around. Okay. If this problem were to go to tomorrow, what would you be able to do? I would finally be a real American, accepted for who I am and loved and be a part of society. You know, so whatever that is, it really tells me that what the person's struggling with isn't just a, problem with their torso. It's a problem with their being in the world of others. And how do we, how I can get maybe a physical therapist to help you stand up, but how do we get somebody to be feeling like they are a part of the society? How do we get somebody to feel part of the world without some level of psychotherapy and without some level of advocacy? And we have the rule of numbers. Oh, I guess I got 5 of them. This one I forgot about. So this is fascinating, is that if you have a client, looking at numbers and ages in particular can be very important. I had a kid, somebody just recently, his behavior was really bad. His behavior started really bad when he's 18 months old. 18 months old, he was really bad. And I said, that's awful. And he started talking about when things started getting bad. And then I said, what else is happening at 18 months? Oh, I was pregnant. Easy to miss as a parent, perhaps, because you're thinking of this, I'm pregnant, I'm excited about the baby coming, we have to paint the room, and I'm not thinking about what this means to this 18-year-old who's having a crisis because he's going to be dethroned. Another way this happens is middle-aged woman becomes depressed at 50, doesn't have motivation, doesn't want to go on, has no idea what's happening, why it's happening, just doesn't feel like she's herself anymore. And then as you look at the age 50, and you talk about the family and the history a little bit, my mom died when she was 50. I've got no blueprint after 50, So by looking at numbers, ages in particular, but numbers, and anniversaries are easy, I got a client just told me yesterday, tomorrow is going to be the anniversary of their marriage, and the husband died, and that's what sent this person into depression. So tomorrow's gonna be rough, but knowing those numbers, the years of numbers is a neat little trick we kind of watch for. And then finally, that idea of exogenous factor we talked about earlier, the exo, beyond us, genus, cause. When did this start? And if you just tell people, when did the problem begin? When did things start? When is it the headaches began? When did the nosebleeds begin? When did this problem begin? When people can identify that, oftentimes there's a stress or a circumstance that's changed. And a lot of times for kids, it's going to school can be the exogenous factor. For adults, it's losing a spouse or losing a job. Sometimes though, like I said, it could be even coming across an inheritance or something that changes things for people. But you're looking for the thing that's outside of this. So what's interesting is that people, they don't want to talk about themselves. You kind of want to blame the situation anyway. So if we can identify the thing that caused it, people are going to talk about it. You were mistreated, a bad thing happened, this shouldn't have happened to you, and they'll open up about that. But if they feel like it was them that's broken, that's sometimes hard for a suffering person to acknowledge. So you find the thing that's outside of them, and that's what we start talking about, and then we learn about themselves reflected through that light. All right, you guys were great. Questions, comments, anything that people may have right now that you want clarification on, or things that you may want to share from our time together?
I just have a question. If you've read all those books behind you.
You know what? I've because of Zoom, I've been stuck here. I would say this is about maybe 40% vanity here. Because I would have I get an inkling for a book that I wanted to read, and then I end up with them. And I also, maybe it's a little bit of a hoarder thing because I don't get rid of books also. that being said, I have read most of them, and I've read most of them too. So in fact, just I got the stack right here of my Adlerian books that I was just did for the thing, and they add up.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
they are, and I wish you could see more because for me, I'm not just interested in psychology. For me, it's like you've got to cover the whole gambit. So read history, read literature, read poetry. Find things that are interesting about the human experience. That's what's going to make you a good therapist. And I have even more records. I love music, and over the years, I've actually I've got a big stack of CDs in my car. I've got a couple clients. We do driving sessions, and my clients will make mixed CDs for our rides, and it's awesome. But what's really cool is like I understand why this song is important to you. I understand why this artist is important to you. I mean, I'm understanding so much information because I have an interest in music, and I keep my interest in music. I keep listening. I keep buying. It's a hobby for me, but it's a way of connecting with people in ways that people don't expect. Like oh, you are into that, or about that. And that as you've got a big ear for things, you start realizing that the human harmony, you can hear it in everything. Jazz or hip hop or country. It's all it's all the human experience. You have to learn how to hear it and empathize with it, and then you can talk. In the same way, if you've got a book or something that you've read and somebody else has read it.
Oh, right, definitely.
Great question, Carrie.
I had one quick question. You mentioned history, like you read history books too, and I kind of, especially because like the community part of therapy is really important to me. Are there any history books you would recommend?
Can you hold on 1 second? Because I'm reading one right now. Let me get it.
Awesome.
Okay, buy this book today, and I'll even tell you where to buy it. There's a new bookstore in Bayview. My friend owns, just started. It's called Lion's Tooth, and they have this book. Oh, hold on. Let me turn off my share. There we go. Stamped from the beginning. History of racism in our society. And there's actually a history. So what you have to think about, and what the author does a good job talking about, is that our history is a racist history. There's, it's like there were, and what I mean by this is that there were behaviors, there were things that were done. The racism was an action first, and it became an attitude second. Incredibly powerful book, and I'm just 2 chapters into it. I guess no, I shouldn't say this. A little bit more than that, but it's fascinating because he takes it through historical figures, and the whole history is in there. And then and this is just by chance, I was reading this one because I had been reading this beforehand. The history of Frederick Douglass is also really good. But these are American history. So for me, because I'm a Caucasian therapist who's worked pretty much my whole life in the inner city, I had to really get educated. I had to get educated about what our history really was. And I needed to understand that to kind of check myself. So that was, there's part of it. But I'd also say any, and I really mean that, any history book, anything that gives factual account of things that happened before. I read a lot of books about music history, for instance, but you understand so much by understanding the things that happened in music history. There's America's stories also in that. Global history too is very important. It's like, no, okay, so now I'm working with families across the sea, so now I've got to learn about Judaism or whatever, so it's like stuff that I don't know about it, so then I'll read about it. So history is very important. And I'd say try to stay, war is important, but I think we focus too much on that. There's a lot of war books and wars, history of Civil War or whatever. There's usually some more interesting accounts of that same stuff that's less focused on, what kind of tanks they used or whatever.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. Anything else? Guys, I'm so glad you're actually asking real questions here.
I have one question. For the rule of numbers, the technique you talked about, is there like a particular framework you use for it, or Is it just free flowing?
It's more or less free flowing. And I guess what I'm getting at with that is that you're always looking for how people as an individual make sense of their age and their current stage in life. So it's free flowing in a sense, and it's also very cultural, because we think in our culture about birthdays. That's not a thing everywhere, but it might be like in some cultures when I have gray hair. It might be the point in time, the point in time when I can no longer work in the field, whatever it is, so there's a I guess the key what you're really looking for is how there are certain rhythms, and in our Western society, lots of times that's encrypted in numbers, and you just pay attention to that. It's really chilling, actually. My one of my mentors said, what time, I was talking about my childhood, and I've talked to him a lot about this stuff, and I said, he said, how old, you said your dad used to work at a factory and then he ended up leaving and doing his own business. How old was he? And I was like, oh, I don't know. He must have been about 37 or so. And I was around 37 at the time. He goes, it's interesting that you're starting a new job now. I was like, what? And the same dynamics that were in my dad's life, I had echoed. It was fascinating. He was thrown out at 17, but my family had to move when I was 17, and I chose to stay behind. He and I were both living on our own at 17. He and I are both the second born left-handed son in the family with a male on top of us. We both ended up working for private practice, for private family-oriented business, and then went out on our own. But there are all these different things that just kind of lined up in terms of our age, and it was like, well, why did that happen? Because unconsciously, my father was my blueprint for a lot of things, and it wasn't always clear to me, how much I looked up to him. So there's a sense of when people notice that there's certain rhythms that happen cross-generational, it's important. And clients really resonate with that if you can pick up on those things. And you say, it's interesting that this is happening at a time when this was happening. It also re-scripts the whole conversation, because the client thought it was all about them. And now when they start realizing, okay, this is something, I'm living out a heritage here. My life started before I was born, generations before. And whatever is going on right now in my life is an echo of the lives before. So I have to, I have to have the opportunity. It's not a curse to be a member of a family or a history, but you have the opportunity to take responsibility now for how I'm going to end the story. How am I going to change it? And that's something that people are really, I think, eager to hear. Anything else, guys?
I just want to add one more thing. Like, the more you talked about it and the more you describe it, the more it seems to me like, because I was actually thinking it kind of sounds like something that maybe like a genogram would help with.
Yeah.
And I mention it because, yeah, we've had some done in class, and I know one of the themes I identified from one of them was death. Yeah, so
yes.
at a particular age range. Yeah, so I just feel like, yeah, that's why I thought of it.
Well, you're absolutely right. In fact, we had Larry's, you'll notice is if you come to conferences, the idea that we're very big on Adler. We're talking about it a lot, but there's also the sense of we're really keen on when we find other people that are interested in this. And 2 years ago, we had at our conference, I forget her name. I've got that book too. That's one I haven't read. The genogram lady. I'm going to remember it later on. But she was our main presenter, and it was like so fascinating to see. And that she had her own story when she went to Ireland to meet her family, do her own genogram. They all started shaking their heads, and they were not happy. And then they pulled her aside and they say, I think you should understand something. There's something wrong with your family tree. Your great-grandfather is not your great-grandfather, and that's why you moved. And it was like, all of a sudden, everything made sense. It was like this piece in the family history. It didn't make it. Why were they not writing to us? Why didn't they care? Because your mom great-grandma had an affair, you guys had to leave town. So it's like that stuff that carries multiple generations. Why is it that we don't go to that family's house for the holiday? But all of that stuff, OLE, that you want to pay attention to, you want to understand that your client. And you can usually get people most clients you can get, oh, hold on. I almost had my brother-in-law on here. Most clients you can get to see that if I'm in this history, I've got an opportunity here to do something different, you know. So it really isn't about getting people script or typecast. It's just being able to see where you are in that history. Now, anything
have
else that people have
Yeah,
before?
I have one quick question
Very
too about the family constellation. Is that where they look at like birth order as well?
Yes.
Because I know that's kind of, and you know what just comes to mind is I have a client and this with twins, you know, twins often say, I was born 1 minute ahead of
Right.
before, I'm the
Right.
older one. So I wonder how that all plays in and how much you guys look at birth order.
Always. And what we always say, and I don't use birth order much, that's definitely 100% at Larian, and I say family constellation instead, because what Adler is really interested in is the psychological birth order, which means, you know, if you identify with being like the oldest, now you might be, maybe you're the cousin, maybe you were a cousin and you have 3 cousins under you that you were living in the same house, you might be the firstborn, but you're also an only child. You know, so the nuances of how your birth order affects things are important. And we also know that a birth order is different than temperament. It's not biologically, it's like, so you could have a certain temperament and be the firstborn, and you maybe don't want to be the firstborn because of your temperament, you know? So the secondborn might get that, you know? So we're always kind of looking at that. And historically, especially when we're more patriarchal in the past and when money flowed through, and fortunately, none of my family ever had money, so I never had to worry about it. But inheritance, going to the first male, you know, that kind of thing. So being the first was important, you know. So there were certain social, cultural contexts that made first being important at times. That maybe doesn't matter anymore, or matters in a different way now, maybe. So it's always changing. It's always cultural. It's always dependent on the context, and I think we're really competitive and materialistic. So we may be competitive here about who came out first, and in some other cultures that wouldn't even be a conversation that ever came up. Like the mom maybe never even paid attention. I don't know. I was giving birth. You know, you look the same. I had to name you each something. You know, so it isn't really about, you know, first. But here, first is big in America. First is big. Anything else? All right, well, then I got one more thing I have to say to you guys, and this is very important. Fact. I could only do it if I bring this up. Thank you. I appreciated our time together. I was not sure if anyone's going to show up, and it was just great to have 3 people that really wanted to be here. Hang on to my email, send me something. I'll remember all 3 of you if you send me a line, and especially if you want to come to the conference. We're looking for volunteers, but as Carrie pointed out, $100 for students isn't bad either. So you can find that, and I'll send you links or whatever you need to volunteer if you're wanting to. Thanks. Take care, and go do something that's not in front of a computer.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.